hospital. I want to kind of get your take on what that means when you're trying to strategize with the president about a war in a separate country, when that president is increasingly isolating him or herself.
First of all, it's a far cry from Joe Biden, isn't it, who got his second booster shot and engages with people directly. My goodness. Vladimir Putin wouldn't even meet face-to-face with the leader of France, the leader of Germany, except for through a long table or across the long table. Isolated leaders are dangerous leaders. Let's just be very blunt about that. Leaders need real information. They need real contact. They need to understand the world as it is to make decisions. And the further isolated Vladimir Putin becomes, the more he becomes like Kim Jong-un up in North Korea, who is essentially disconnected from the world and makes crazy decisions at a moment's notice. And so that is the big fear, that a country with the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet has a leader disconnecting himself or being disconnected from reality by his aides. And that can make for a very scary outcome. And I think that's also part of what's happening with the White House and the administration, and telling the world that this individual is disconnected and that he's not getting the real information, and hoping that maybe there are other avenues to get his brain back on track, because he clearly is a dangerous person right now.
You know, we had a whole kerfuffle after President Biden spoke in Warsaw over the weekend about his use of the 9 words, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. And I personally, and I'll share this, did not take it that way. To me, I took it sort of as the same way you just mentioned, continuing to isolate Putin, continuing to sort of take away his global influence, right? Not his role as president of Russia. I don't think they can pry that away from him. He loves it so much. But let me ask you this. If he is not, you know, in touch with what's actually happening on the ground, other than knowing that he wants Ukraine and kind of Moldova as well, how much of a good faith partner can Russia actually be, using the term loosely, at the negotiating table? Because already this week they have promised one thing, done something totally different, and the Ukrainians have said that they think that they use these promises, much like they did during the diplomacy, and again, you lose terminology, of January and February, to get ready to invade. So, you know, at some point, why does Ukraine keep showing up to the table?
Yeah, look, you framed it pitch perfect. It's tragic that we can't be confident in the Russian leadership right now and its ability to negotiate. But this is not something that is isolated in terms of their inability to actually follow the words that they're saying. Russia was gaslighting for months about not wanting to invade Ukraine and did so anyways. But for the Ukrainian people, to your last question, they really have no choice. President Zelensky wants to end this war, doesn't want to end it in a manner that helps Moscow achieve its objectives. And he needs Moscow to commit to leaving the country. And that means continue to engage, continuing to go. But what we're seeing is Russia is essentially playing some countries for dupes and is trying to disconnect the Western alliance and break the unity, which has been incredibly powerful at keeping the pressure on Vladimir Putin through sanctions and diplomatic isolation. We even saw some cracks this past week where the argument that Russia was leaving a bit around Kyiv and pulling back somehow caused the French to think, well, perhaps we can reduce our sanctions. That is what Vladimir Putin wants. He cannot be allowed to have that. I do think, just going to also your 9 words point about President Biden, he spoke from the heart, he spoke what's real, and he said the right thing. And he really did an effective job last week at bringing our allies together. Russia sees it, and that's why they're trying to flail about and break up our unity. But it is very concerning if you can't have confidence in your negotiating partner at the table or across from you at the table, because these do have to be implemented decisions at some point. And right now, unfortunately, that confidence is very low.
Joel, I have less than a minute, but I have one last question for you, and it's about this new package of $500 million in aid to Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky would really love a no-fly zone. That's a non-starter for the U.S. Would really love Polish jets. Non-starter for the U.S. What else can he ask for at this point, other than continued kind of money and ammunition?
But there's a lot. Coastal defense, enabling the Ukrainian military to defend its territory against those ships off the coast that are attacking. More javelins, more air defense systems support, as well as more drones and American support for that. There's a lot of military supply that is in the pipeline that's being pushed out and that we can continue to push out. And of course, the most important thing is secure humanitarian corridors, because this is a humanitarian crisis, a tragedy. Half the Ukrainian people have been affected, 4 million are refugees. So that is always going to be top of mind as well.
Joel, thank you so much for that insight. We will have you back on soon. Joel Rubin is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and President of the Washington Strategy